Well, evening, folks, or morning, wherever you are. Tiny Tigers Television. I was joined by Chris and Phil again, and special guest this week, Anthony Koutoufides. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today, taking time out of your busy schedule. How are you?
Very good. Thank you, David. Good to be on here. Thank you, boys, Chris and Phil.
Ready to rock and roll. If people don't know who Anthony is, an absolute legend of the game, one-man club for Carlton between 92 and 2007. Lee Matthews Trophy winner, 2000, twice All-Australian, Hall of Famer, the lot. There's nothing this guy hasn't really done. Played pretty much every position and managed to slot a few goals in his time. One thing I want to know is, how did it all kind of start? Because I've heard you were quite a sportsman across the whole board, really. So how did you get into Aussie rules?
Yeah, that's a good question, David. My parents were both migrants to Australia, and I didn't really know or understand too much about the game. But at the age of 8, I had an older brother who was a year older than me, Paul. He was 9, and our friends invited us down to a local footy club to try out. We sort of fell in love with the oval ball at primary school, and I think they could see that we had a little bit of sporting ability, and so they said, "Come down and try out," and we did. We didn't tell Mum and Dad. And so by the time we got home, it was pitch dark, and Mum and Dad were furious, and both of them didn't want us to play. When we told them we went to try out, and we said, "No, we're going to play." And so we had this wonderful Australian family who said, "We'll pick you up and take you to the games if you're keen." And we said, "We're in." And so that's where the journey started. And one day, as they stopped off at the front of my house, and Mum and Dad were out the front doing the gardening, they really couldn't speak English, my Mum and Dad, and so this Australian family were trying to communicate with them, and it wasn't too great. My mum, damn Greek mum, was Italian. I don't even know how they communicate. It was real weird. And my dad started taking us to the games after that, and then my mum started to join us the year after, and they just both fell in love with the game. And it got us a little bit out of our European way of living and started to understand the Australian way of living and combine the both, and it was just a fabulous way. And they just loved the game. We were able to witness, both my brother and I, play football and achieve a lot. I had another sport also, athletics. I was Australian champion high jumper at one stage, and this guy, his name was Tim Forsyth, came along and beat me in the high jump. He, believe it or not, had the second. So the world record, junior world record, was 2:33. He was in second place of all time, 2:29. So he was a phenomenal athlete. I was also Australian champ in the 110-metre hurdles. I had the Australian record, and I won many multi-events, which was like a decathlon. Mm-hmm. And at the age of 17, I had to decide which way to go. The AFL Football Club, Carlton, were trying to tell me to do pre-seasons and give up athletics earlier. I'm like, no. So I just went from summer doing athletics to winter playing sport, and I was able to achieve great things with both sports, and then had to make a decision at the age of 17.
Mm-hmm. Jeez.
That's cool.
So you got 208, wasn't it, Kuta? 208 was your highest for the high. Was that right? High jump, 208.
Yeah, I jumped 2.8 metres at the age of 16, but Tim Forsyth jumped 2.16 metres, but then he went on to jump 2.29. At that stage, Chris, I was under 15 champ. I jumped 196 when I was 14. But I think with footy, because you're running those longer distances and you're a bit more physical. I just started to just feel out a little, and all of a sudden I was this skinny, still a skinny kid, but I wasn't that high jumping skinny because of that, that longer running and that football stuff. So just started to feel out a little. It was always going to be difficult to meet a 91, and someone like Tim Forsyth, who's 6'6", probably 198 to 2 metres tall, was always going to be difficult. But well, my brother was a state hurdles champion, 110-metre hurdles. So I started competing against him, as we do. Older brother was like, "Man, I'm going to beat you." Yeah. And then that was able to, I don't know, because of doing the multi-event, I had to be good at all the events and started to just do a little bit more training with the hurdles. And before I knew it, I became state champion and then national champion, and then, having the Australian record. And we had a phenomenal athlete. His name was Kyle Vanderkuyp, who went on to come 7th at maybe I think it was the 1996 Atlanta Olympic Games, and so he was 2 years older than myself. So at the same age, if I had the Australian record, that means I was quicker than Kyle. So could have potentially have gone on to become an Olympian, but I always knew it was going to be really difficult as an individual sport, whereas football was that team game, and that's, I think, what attracted me more. And plus, in Australia, and David and Phil may not understand this, but Chris, I'm sure you would understand it. AFL football here was a religion growing up. And so, you know, if I had to decide who was going to be like, who I wanted to be, you know, an athlete or a footballer, there were so many icons and, you know, footballing superstars that I wanted to be like more so than, you know, an Australian athlete. And so that's where football really grabbed me.
Who did you look up to from football? You're saying it's obviously like a religion over there. Who was your idol? Who did you aspire?
I know you and David both voted for Collingwood, Phil. Is that right?
It is.
It's terrible, mate. But I voted for Collingwood too.
Absolutely. Say that again. It's absolutely terrible.
It's disgraceful, but I did vote for Collingwood growing up, so I can't say really too much, but I idolised all the Collingwood players back then, from Ricky Barham on the wing to Renee King to Ronnie Wearmouth to Tony Shaw to the Dacos to the Macedonian Marvel, mate. Wes Fellows, Michael Christian, and Brian Taylor. I just loved all the Collingwood players back then, and I always wore the black and white around. It was my first local football club was black and white, hence the reason why I think I barracked for Collingwood. I'm not sure if I barracked for them before. My brother was a mad Carlton supporter. Collingwood lost every grand final, and Carlton won so many premierships at that time. And then where I lived was the Carlton zone, and so at the age of 14, I got the letter. As soon as I signed to be part of the Carlton Football Club, then Carlton had the entitlement of whether they wanted to keep me or not. And so, you know, I ended up at the greatest football club. Sorry, boys, but the Carlton Football Club had so much success and power. And, you know, we really dominated the competition back then. And, you know, we were the league leaders, not like now, but back then when I walked into that football club. So it was a great time.
Can I just go back when you said, I like this one, in 1997, only because these boys are Collingwood supporters, we've got to bag them as much as we can, but 1997, you kicked the biggest goal, a 6-goal 4 against the Pies. So you want to talk about that one a lot?
There was better games I think I played against Collingwood, and I always loved playing against Collingwood. There was the biggest arch rivals, in particular when I first started. The build-up to that week was always enormous and big, and everyone wanted to go to the games, and people were asking for tickets that I didn't even know, and it was great. But that day there, Chris, as you know, I guess being that sort of versatile player where I played on every position on the field, sometimes I had to give away, you know, my strength was always the midfield, but sometimes if the club needed me up forward or defence or wherever it was, I never said no. And so that day there, obviously there was no one else to play full forward, and they thought maybe that I was the best option. So I played a full forward and kicked the 6 goals 4. And I think it was Mal Michael, who was a phenomenal defender, and strong and impenetrable really back then. And so I had a bit of a day out. So I was very lucky, I guess. And
who was that against again, Kuda? Who was that against? It was Collingwood, wasn't it? Yeah.
I can kick you, Rod. You know that. I'm in charge of who stays in this meeting and who goes. So watch yourself. I was going to ask
kids, boys. I've told my kids to boo Collingwood every time we do our food. It's always boo Collingwood, right?
Absolutely.
I was going to ask, what's the kind of difference between when you were playing and now? Is the main thing fitness? Is it new techniques? What's the difference between now and back then?
Yeah, these guys are more athletes now. I was probably known as the first athlete to come into the game that maybe changed the game a little bit too, as recruiters started to go and look for 6'3", 6'4" athletic type of players. It's not always that simple though, because you can be athletic but not be able to get the footy, and so you've got to have both of those aspects. The game is a lot quicker now. The guys look more athletic than us, and so they probably don't carry the weight like what we did. We were a bit more like bigger and solid and a bit more bulkier. Our game back then was just, you know, we just played one-on-one kind of footy, and so we knew who was playing on who, and we had the biggest battles against some of the players. And if you go and look at some of the greats back in the day, you can see that there was maybe someone like a Wayne Carey against Glenn Jakovich. Wayne Carey is renowned as sometimes saying maybe the greatest player of all time, but every time he came up against Glenn Jakovich was able to beat him, and Jacko was a phenomenal player as well. And so we always look forward to the one-on-one battles, like your Stephen Silvani, who was the fullback of the team at Century, who would play on some of the all-time great full forwards like Tony Lockett and Gary Ablett and Jason Dunstall. It's not often now you can go to games and see those sort of things and look forward to it, because it's always changing and players are always off. And so you see a player marking the forward line, you just go, how did he get free? Like in our day, it was very hard to do that. And in our day, the game was just such a great game as a spectacle. And I think even like, you know, my parents are migrants, and all these other Europeans that came at that time fell in love with the game, because when you watched it, it was exciting. And I think my oldest boy, who does not like footy one little bit. But I remember he watched the Anzac Day game back in 1995, was replayed on Foxtel. It was, of course, your team, Collingwood versus Essendon. It was a sellout. Like, there was people locked out of the stadium. It was almost 100,000 there just on a normal game. But he watched that game. He said, "Oh, my God, Dad, if the game was like that now, I'd probably sit there and watch it too." So the game was different. It was exciting to watch. I had my relatives come from Italy back in 1995, the greatest year of all time, when we won the premiership. But they were here for 6 weeks, and they just fell in love with the game and had no idea about the rules or anything. But it was just really exciting to watch. Nowadays, it's a bit like short kick here, handball there, not as many goals. It's just not the excitement of what it used to be back. What I believe in the 80s and 90s, which was the greatest era of Australian rules football, is still a phenomenal game. But I believe, I could be biased, that was the best period of football.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Yeah, those days of full forward and full back, bustling it out every Saturday, sort of gone a little bit, isn't it? Lance Franklin, probably the only one that's probably doing a bit of that now. Other than that, you don't get those big holes anymore, do you? Really?
No, you don't. And when you watch someone like Jason Dunstall kick 17 goals, whatever he kicked that day, and Gary Ablett kicking 13, 14 goals, or Locker kicking 15, 16, you just don't get that anymore. But what footy was just an incredible game to watch.
Absolutely.
What do you remember of the '95 championship?
The '95, what I remember?
Yeah.
Us winning, Dave, mate, of course. I remember, Dave, the build-up to that game was enormous. I was a 22-year-old kid, and as a young kid, I was watching grand finals, hoping that one day I would play senior footy. Never, ever imagined that I'd be playing in a grand final in the MCG. I never thought I'd ever be that good enough to be able to do that. I was there that day, and my career started very slow because I was on the list in 91 not getting a game, and then 92 6 games, 93 8 games. 94 got dropped halfway through that year and thought my career was over. Then finally they picked me in a position that I love to play in, and I never looked back after that, started dominating, and I became the player who I was. But within those 3.5 years, I could have easily have quit at any time because it was a very emotional ride. Lucky I had a fantastic family, incredible family support who just believed in me. They always said that you would be the best player out there. Maybe I just didn't believe. Maybe the coach didn't believe. Maybe the coach didn't understand how to play me. There's a lot of these factors that come into it. And I could have easily been one of those local footballers that, he was a great local footballer, but just wasn't good enough in the AFL. But luckily, I found that position. So 95 came along, young kid, from obscurity to all of a sudden everyone recognising you walking around and getting pats on the back. And, all of a sudden the team started wanting me and offering me contracts. And, I got, Adidas sponsorship. It was just everything happened just bang like that. And 95 is one of those years where we only lost 2 games for the entire year. It was an AFL record until Essendon beat us in year 2000. We won 16 games in a row to win that premiership.
Crazy.
But I remember halfway through the last quarter, we're up by 80-odd points. I'm walking around the MCG trying to soak in every second that I could, just looking around, 90-odd thousand people going, I can't believe it, I'm about to be a premiership player here. And so that moment there, it was the greatest day of my life. I got married and I've had 3 kids, and you're never going to say which one you prefer, your kids or the premiership. You're always going to say your kids. They're the most. I'd have to be loose screws in my head. But to be honest, that grand final was the greatest day of my life. And it's pretty hard to surpass that sort of feeling when you're out there with your teammates playing. When you think of all the blood, sweat and tears and everything I went through to make it as a senior player to then play off in a grand final, I'll never, ever forget that. And I think we'll always have a special bond with my teammates of 1995. When I look back in my career and think of some of the greatest teammates in my time, I always reflect back to those moments there. And so that day there, I can take and cherish with me forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So when you say you... Go on. I was
just going to ask you, Kouta, you've already answered this question a little bit about the premiership, which is your number one thing that you probably hang your hat on. But out of the other things, best and fairest, most valuable player, Hall of Famer, 1992 reserves, best and fairest. Well done, mate. That was good. What would you put second behind the premiership? Would you best and fairest, most valuable, voted by other players, or is that something you think about, or not really?
Yeah, the MVP was a good one. Year 2000 was my greatest year, where I was favourite for the Brownlow. I didn't unfortunately win it. I think I came 4th or whatever, but I think I put in 13 best on grounds in a row by so-called the media people, but the umpires obviously didn't see that. I had to produce some big games to get 3 votes, man. I got one game, I think I had 39 possessions, took 14 marks to get 3 votes. And another one I had to have 38 and kick 5 goals. So I don't know what they expected from me, but anytime if I got like one game, I think I had 32 and kick 4 and I got 1 vote. Like, I don't know what I had to do to get 3 votes. It's really difficult. So that MVP is special. There is no doubt about it. It will never have that recognition as high as the Brownlow, although I believe it should be because it's voted by your peers. And sometimes I don't know what the umpires are thinking sometimes out there. I never argue back and they say, oh, maybe you argue. I wasn't that sort of type of player. But I don't know. I guess they have their opinion on who they thought was best on the field. But I think out of all my career, when I look back, because I always think back to the early days of how hard it was and such a struggle to make it in the senior team. And maybe the coach didn't really see much in me or didn't really understand. I always think, oh, I could have easily been one of those guys that didn't quite make it and became this local footballer. And luckily, somehow something changed and whatever, and I had that luck to be able to play. But I think it was always that to close that locker, that to be recognised as an AFL Hall of Famer would probably go down as maybe my second most favourite thing, because that puts you at another level, and that puts me with all the greats that I play with, and some of them not even in the Hall of Fame, to say, maybe am I that little bit, not to say the big-headed thing or anything, but maybe that little bit, above them because I'm able to be part of the Australian Rules Football Hall of Fame. That's something I never could have imagined. And so the day I got the letter, it was a little bit of a shock to me. And but what an honour it was to be able to say that, I've made that now. And when I go and sit there at their functions and look around, to think that I'm in that elite group, that they're just, just closes the locker permanently for me. Because when I finished footy, I wanted to get back in. I never did. All the doors were closed. I don't know why. Still to this day, I don't know why. When I feel like I had so much to offer, I played in every single position. I got tagged. I was a tagger. Like, I just understand every position of where you can play and how during the game where you can go from maybe a midfielder to a forward, or all these little tricks that I learned along the way. I've never been able to teach anyone, maybe only my kids. And
there's an opening at the Tigers, mate. There's an opening up in the northeast of England for the Tigers.
I might think about that. I love England. I love it. I love it. It's a great place.
Yeah, well, it's there. Feel good position for him.
It's got to be up top, mate. We're service really lacking up top,
I was going to ask before, obviously you've had like the kind of highs and the lows. How did you kind of keep going, keep concentrating? Because obviously at the start you said it wasn't kind of working out. How did you keep going? How did you get back from injury with the ACL? And how did you just keep pushing yourself? What's the main bit of advice you would give somebody?
It's your goals, you know what I mean? Like, I always felt like I could come back and still contribute to the team. I always felt like I could improve and get better. Even, maybe my best games that I played, there was always the areas that you could improve. And so we all get setbacks in life. And so you have to accept that and keep pushing through and not dwell on it and think, oh, why me? And you could easily do that. But, some people get through AFL unscathed and not many injuries, and some don't even make it because of injuries. And some get injuries throughout their career. And I got hit probably at the peak of my powers, where I started to get injuries just at the time when I just didn't need them. But I look back and think it could have been worse that if I didn't even have that opportunity to get to that level. So I was always ups and downs in life. When I finished football too, that 3-year period of transition where I thought I was ready to was a very difficult time for me. But I always tried to work on myself to get myself better every day. I didn't sleep in. I didn't feel sorry for myself. It was always like, what can I do to better myself? What else can I do? How can I improve? What can I do a little bit better than I did yesterday, today? And that's all I do. I'm nothing special. I always say to people, when I walked into that football club at the age of 17, gifted. I was gifted. Otherwise, there's no way I would have made it. I had so many bad habits. I slept in. I was lazy at training, not push myself, not do a little bit extra. Just felt like if I just did it, that was enough. But I had to learn from some of the greats around me, and I learned by looking at them and observing, because I had a strong goal. And my goal was to make senior footy. And, everything that I did was because of that. And, of course, what I represented my family. I felt like I represented my family, mum and dad, and everything that they gave to me was like, I've just got to do it. And the most difficult time of my life was when I lost my father in early 1998. It was like, I always say, it wasn't maybe like a great mentor and educator to me because he didn't really understand the game, but he was that loving best friend, and that's all I needed from him. He just gave me everything, supported me, loved me, and I would say in his eyes I was always the best, and he was, you know, the proudest father going around. And so I always look to my kids. I want to be better than my dad because my dad, you know, he was a smoker. It wasn't a drinker, and never really went out much, but I never really liked that side of it, and so I never smoked in my life because of it. Yeah, maybe I was a bit of a heavy drinker during my career, playing career, but I don't really drink anymore. And so I just want to lead that way and learn from my father, and, you know, be the same to my kids, be their best friends as well. But I really want to help and teach them as well, and so that's the reason why I do everything that I do.
Spot on. Yeah. No, I can relate. You know, I lost my old man in '98 as well, and it's a void you never get filled, does it? But I think you can, yeah, as you say, with your kids, especially, you learn from your mistakes, and you just want the best for all them. So, you know, I absolutely take that on board big time. Well done.
Yeah, thank you, mate. Yeah, it was a very difficult period, and because I used to drive mum and dad to the games, and then, you know, that 1998 when he wasn't there, there was just silence in the car. And it was really hard for me to concentrate. I had a bad first half of that year, I'll tell you. I was so that was probably the time when I was like, why me? You know, why do I have to lose my father? I want him here. Nah, you know, I can't handle this anymore or whatever. But there was a moment that came where I played such a bad game that when I went home a little bit emotional, my two greatest mentors were Barry Mitchell, who's Tom Mitchell's father, and Wayne Britton. They were the two greatest who understood me, who took my game to another level. But when they sat me down after that game and said, you know, you've got something to really think about, Kout, if you really want to be part of it, your club here, as much as you've lost your dad, and it's a cruel game, you'll get left behind. And so I was a little bit emotional that night. I remember going home, but I was pretending to talk to my dad, and I said, I promised my dad that I would train harder than I ever did before. And I didn't want to disappoint him because I was thinking if he's looking down on me being a drunk now and just wasting my life, he'd be very disappointed. So I promised him, and when I promised him, I didn't want to be a liar. You know, I wanted to stand by my word. And so I just started to train harder than I ever did before. And 99 was one of my great, unbelievable year that I had. And I probably didn't get enough acknowledgement for it, for how good it was. And then 2000 was my greatest year, where I was Brownlow favourite. In 2001, I don't even think 2001 I got enough recognition for the year that I had, because those 3 years there, they were really, you know, not the bragging part, but they were pretty outstanding, you know, seasons of footy, where I dominated as centre back in 1999. Maybe, yeah, I finished second in the club best and fairest. They acknowledged at the club, and I missed the 5 last games of that year, so I could have easily won another best and fairest there as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I've just 1995 and 2000, you were All Australian. Where did that sit before a season? Did you go, right, I want to get All Australian, or did it just happen and it was just an extra bonus? I mean, it's pretty huge to play for your country, but was it something a goal that you wanted, or did it just happen?
Just happened. 95, you know, came off the back of 94, where I just finished off that second half of the year. I think it was in the best players every week, except for the last game that we played, the second final. And yeah, so 95 just came out of nowhere, and we had such a brilliant year that I was lucky enough to get, you know, picked in that team. And 2000, I don't know, I guess it all came together through hard work in, you know, the loss of my father, and then the 99 season, of course, the prelim final when we got over the line against the unbeatables Essendon, and that belief and everything inside of me, I was able to make the All-Australian team. I never represented Australia, unfortunately. If I would have, it would have been probably year 2000, 2001, but they were the years that I finished the season with an injury, and so I couldn't play.
Yeah. I see Stephen Kernahan, that game in 99, Stephen Kernahan, was he club president? He was club president, wasn't he, at one point?
No, he wasn't there. No, I think he was on the board, but he was part of the match committee at that stage.
Right. He described your last quarter against the Bombers as, what did he write? The greatest quarter of football ever played. Do you remember that quarter very well? And did you know that you were on fire at that point?
Very well, Chris. I was in Albury country, just over the border of Victoria into New South Wales. Saturday night, they asked me the same thing about that going down as possibly the greatest quarter of all time. How do you feel, you know, being that individual player? Of course, it's an honour to me, but I remember that day, and I love John Elliott. Jack Elliott was a president. That day that he patted me on the back and said, "Your day today, Kout." The first time he did it, I just felt like then I was part of the family, and I loved him. I just thought he just brought culture to that club, and he just wanted to be part of the family. It was different to the other presidents. They were the complete opposite, and hence the reason why there's been no success since, I think, I'm not talking about nowadays, but after he left, those 5 years that I played were not very easy. Okay, they were very tough times. But
Dennis Pagan.
I remember. Sorry.
That Dennis Pagan years? Was that the Dennis Pagan years?
Yeah. But it's not just solely him, but anyway, that's another podcast for that. Let's stay positive. But
next question.
the 99 prelim. Yeah, I remember three-quarter time. I had a real good feel of the ball in the play that day. I was stuck in back pocket though. I'm like, man, I need to unleash. Like, so I get the three-quarter time huddle, and I'm looking upstairs, and I'm like, please put me in the midfield. You know, I was just waiting for whether it was Parkin coaching that day or Wayne Britton, I don't know, but I dare say Wayne Britton was mainly the coach then, and he was making all the moves. And so I was like, please just put me in midfield. The call didn't come at three-quarter time, but about a minute or two into the last quarter, I seen the runner running towards me. I'm like, he's going to tell me I'm going in the midfield. And he did. He said, you're in the midfield, Kout. I just left my player, mate, and I was just off I went. And I think we may have just scored a goal then, and that's when we had the bounce of the ball, and I was in there. And then Justin Murphy had that ball in the far half-forward flank, and I was running from the other side. I was like, hold on to that ball, hold on to that ball. And I think as he glazed over, he could see me sprinting and just waited that little bit. As he bombed the ball in, I took that mark and it started. And we all lifted then. People forget that Essendon kicked 7 goals, 7 in that third quarter. We were walking off halftime thinking I'm in another grand final here. By three-quarter time, they're ahead of us. And they were just a much better team than us, much better all year, because they beat us by 40-odd points the first time and 70-odd points the second time. That day there, I don't know if it was Jack Elliott's little talk around to everyone saying, I've got a funny feeling about today, whether that was just enough to just ignite us. I'm not sure. It did to me. I can't, talk on behalf of the other players. So when I got that call and that at the end, when Mark McCurry had that ball, he would have kicked that goal 99.9 times out of 100. He was a phenomenal play, Merck. He was, to us, I reckon it was more dangerous than a James Hird back in the peak of the days. And he missed that ball, and then we kicked it in, and then Dean Wallace wanted to take on Mad Dog Fraser Brown. That was a mistake. And Doggy Brown grabbed him, and when we got that ball, Justin Murphy over to Rats, and Rats on to Justin Murphy, that was, apart from all the grand finals, in my opinion, will go down in history for all the Carlton supporters probably as their favourite game of all time.
Yeah, nice. Besides being against the Bombers, but other than that, it was good.
yeah, that's true.
So
just quickly jump in,
where would be your most difficult day? The worst, the hardest game, the toughest opponent, the crowd's on your back. What would that be?
There was, a lot of games were tough. When the opposition were ready and we weren't quite ready. I mean, I think AFL is the toughest game in the world. I could be biased. I don't know. But out in the field is a tough game because you need to be able to. You need speed. You need endurance. You need peripheral vision. You need to be able to bend over. You need to be able to mark the ball. You need to protect yourself when men are coming from all over the place. So it's a very difficult game to just come in and play and think you'll go okay with it. My toughest opponent was Matthew Richardson at Richmond. I played on him twice. And we talk about speed and endurance. He had them both. Plus, he had about 4 centimetres on me, if not 5 centimetres. He was tall and big and strong and had that running capacity of a midfielder. And when I played in his domain in defence, mate, he was the one player that I just couldn't beat. The 2 times that I played on him, I felt like every time the ball was going to come in, he was going to get it. I never felt like that against any other player. So he was a little bit like kryptonite to Superman, I think, like he was just tough going. And you always have some of these footballers that, and Richo was a superstar, but you may have these other footballers that maybe weren't so great, but they were just athletic enough to be able to just sit with you all day and make that game a little bit more difficult than what it would have been if they weren't playing. But Richo as a player, to me, was one of those players that was just very difficult to beat.
I'll just jump in because we've got only about 3 minutes left on the actual call itself, so we'll probably have to start wrapping it up soon. I was going to say one last question: where was the hardest place, or who's the worst fans to like get on your back?
Oh, mate, any interstate, like if we're talking, I shouldn't say anywhere from South Australia or WA, they were terrible, those supporters. That's a lie. I think probably people always say the South, the Adelaide supporters were probably the worst supporters because they're just so fanatical about their team. I never really had any issues with them, in all honesty. Like as a team, I reckon the Bulldogs of the late 90s, they were like mongrels, you know what I mean? They were like at you. They had the Liberatores who would chew on your feet, as you're playing. And Jose Romero and Dimartino, and these are all great guys, don't get me wrong, but they played hard and tough footy. And they were always hard to play against because those guys there just like were just at you and at you and at you. And they were dirty, you know what I mean? The way the footy was played anyway, but they just had that few more percent on them, and just we knew every time we were going out to battle against them, it was going to be a battle. But it was always good to look forward to playing against them.
That's class. Well, like I say, we've only got a minute or so left now, so I think it's just time to say thank you very much for joining us. Chris was so excited he couldn't sleep last night, so he's played this over in his head so many times over. So it's been a dream for him. It's been really good chatting to you. We've got 2 minutes left. Any kind of last words of wisdom for any of our Tiger players or any other kind of players that's out there, or anyone who wants to come and give the game a go?
I think I had to wish the Tigers all the very best, I think, for this weekend. No matter what level of footy you play, you always get to enjoy it. And I think whether you win a premiership at AFL like I was lucky enough, or whether you win it locally, I don't think you ever forget it. And so I say cherish your time, make the most of it. Some of you have bigger dreams in football and some just want to play it for casually. But I say, if you talk to me, that if you can get every little bit that you can out of yourself and just train hard and do what you can, you're going to enjoy the game more. And because once you get to my age of 48, I wish I could still play. So make the most of your time, do whatever you can to get the best out of yourself, and win those premierships so you can go and just remember them forever and tell your kids about them like I do daily about my victory in 1995.
Oh, absolutely. That's fantastic. We might cut that little bit, edit that, and just play it pre-game every Saturday. That's awesome, mate. That's absolutely awesome.
No worries.
Well, thank you very much again. Like I said, it's been really good to talk to you, and thanks for taking some time out of your day to talk to us.
My pleasure, guys. All the very best. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kip. I really appreciate it, mate.
Right.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed our podcast, please drop a like and share it around if possible. Remember, you can find us on Twitter at TineTeesARFC, on Instagram at TineTeesTigersAFL, Facebook TineTeesTigers, and also our website is www.tineteestigers.co.uk. Thanks again. Cheers.